Title: The Teacher Tried to Humiliate Him Until He Touched the Piano. Elijah Rivers was the quiet kind who sat by the window, pencil gently tapping against his notebook, lost in thought. It wasn't nerves, just a habit. One his mother often told him to break, but it helped him focus. While the rest of the class at Jefferson Middle School chatted and laughed before the bell, Elijah stayed locked into his work, eyes on the worksheet in front of him. He liked finishing things early. It gave him a sense of control in a world that rarely gave him any. At the front of the room stood Ms. Abigail Thornton, a veteran sixth-grade teacher with nearly 15 years under her belt. Known for being strict but fair, at least to those she favored. Elijah, however, had never been one of them. She never yelled at him, never mocked him in front of the class. But she didn't have to. When he raised his hand, she'd look right past him. When he answered correctly, she moved on without a word. But if he ever stumbled, rare though it was, she lingered, almost enjoying it. Elijah noticed. So did others. "Yo, she barely even sees you," Tyler Whitman, the boy sitting next to him, whispered one day. "You got, like, teacher invisibility or something." Elijah just shrugged. "Guess I do." But today felt different. Ms. Thornton kept glancing his way, more than usual, not with irritation, but with something else. Anticipation, maybe. The lesson was about the Civil War, standard history stuff. Elijah took notes, waiting for the usual rhythm to return. But then, for the first time, something broke the pattern. "Elijah," she said, her voice sharp and sudden, "why don't you answer this one?" Heads turned. Elijah blinked. She never called on him. He straightened in his seat, scanned the board, and spoke clearly. General Sherman's March to the Sea was a military campaign aimed at destroying the Confederacy's resources and morale. Ms. Thornton raised an eyebrow. Not bad at all. It was a textbook perfect answer. A few students exchanged surprised looks. Tyler gave him a side eye like, "Okay, what just happened?" The class moved on, but the energy had shifted. Ms. Thornton wasn't ignoring him anymore. She was watching, and right before the bell rang, she made her move. "Elijah," she said as the room filled with the sound of zipping backpacks and shuffling feet. "Stay back for a moment." He didn't rush, took his time packing up, then walked to her desk. "I overheard you the other day," she began, folding her hands, her voice smooth. "You were talking about your grandfather." Elijah frowned. "What about him?" "You said he was a musician?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, he played jazz, piano." Her lips curled ever so slightly, not quite a smirk, but close. "Interesting. You must have picked up a thing or two." Elijah didn't answer right away. Something about her tone made the room feel colder. "A little," he admitted. Her smile widened, though there was no kindness in it. "Good to know." The bell rang. Elijah grabbed his bag and started toward the door, but her voice stopped him cold. "Tomorrow," she said, motioning toward the old upright piano in the back of the room. "I want you to play something." For the class, Elijah turned around, stunned. A few students lingered in the doorway, eyes flicking between him and the teacher. "Why?" he asked. Ms. Thornton tilted her head, as if the question amused her. "Why not? You said your grandfather played. Surely some of that talent runs in the family." He recognized the tone. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't encouragement. It was a setup. She wanted to embarrass him, but Elijah had no intention of giving her what she wanted. That night he didn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words over and over. This wasn't about music. It was a challenge, a test, and she expected him to fail, to stumble, to become the punchline of her lesson. What she didn't know was that she'd made a huge mistake. By morning, the whispers had already started. "You're going to play today?" Brandon Hall, the class clown, smirked from across the room. Elijah ignored him. "Didn't know you were a piano guy," Tyler muttered beside him. Elijah kept his eyes on his notebook. "There's a lot people don't know," he replied quietly. Ms. Thornton entered the room with her usual stiff composure. She didn't greet the class. She didn't even glance at her notes. Her eyes were already on Elijah. Title: They expected him to fail, but then he played this. The first half of class dragged by like a slow, ticking clock. Elijah barely registered the lesson. His mind was elsewhere, looping through what was coming the moment Miss Thornton would call on him in front of everyone. And then she did. "Well," she said, closing her textbook and glancing at the clock. "We've got a little time before the next lesson." "Perfect." Her eyes found him like a spotlight. "Elijah, let's see what you can do." The air shifted. Students straightened in their seats. Whispers passed like ripples. Some kids leaned in. Others chuckled quietly. Everyone was watching. Elijah didn't move right away. He felt the weight of their stares, dozens of eyes pressing in. His heart wasn't racing, but it beat with steady power. Then he stood. A few muffled laughs echoed through the room as he walked toward the old upright piano in the corner. Someone muttered something under their breath, but Elijah didn't need to hear the words. The tone said enough. Miss Thornton stood with her hands neatly clasped. "Play whatever you'd like." Elijah studied the piano for a moment. It was ancient. Keys yellowed with time, a few chipped at the edges. He ran his fingers gently across them once, like greeting an old friend. It was slightly out of tune, not by much, but enough to be noticeable. Still, it would do. He sat down, rested his hands on the keys. He already knew what he was going to play. Then, snick. Someone behind him tried and failed to hide a laugh. That was it. This wasn't just about Miss Thornton anymore. It wasn't just about a lesson. It was about everyone. Everyone who doubted him. Everyone who looked past him like he didn't exist. And he was about to show them exactly who he was. The room quieted like never before. Even Miss Thornton, usually calm and smug, looked curious. Students leaned in, some expecting a mess, others hoping for it. But Elijah didn't look at them. He focused on the piano, on the weight of the keys, on the memory of afternoons with his grandfather, warm jazz echoing through their small home like magic. And then he played. The first few notes floated into the air, soft and steady, a slow blues progression, smooth and deliberate. His left hand kept time with practiced ease while his right hand danced along the melody, weaving a story with each note. The whispers stopped. The smirks disappeared. Even the class clown sat motionless. Miss Thornton's arms folded across her chest, her expression shifting, not mockery, not confusion, but something she hadn't expected to feel. Elijah didn't care. He wasn't playing for her. He wasn't playing for them. He was playing for his grandfather, for himself. Each chord pulsed with emotion, grief, pride, defiance. The room faded. The classroom walls, the students, even the teacher. They all disappeared as Elijah sank deeper into the music. His fingers moved like they belonged there, not just hitting the right notes, but living them. It wasn't just performance, it was communication, a language only he and the keys could speak. And then he took it further. He shifted into something more complex, letting his hands cascade through intricate patterns. Runs and chords his grandfather had taught him after weeks of struggle and stubbornness. He remembered finally getting it one summer afternoon, both of them laughing at the breakthrough. Now he played it flawlessly. A deep, rolling bass line surged beneath soaring melodies. The room held its breath as he poured himself into every second. The longer he played, the heavier the silence grew. The music wrapped around the room like smoke. Undeniable, unforgettable. No one laughed now. Tyler leaned forward, eyes wide with disbelief. Brandon, who had cracked a joke earlier, sat back in silence, arms crossed, no longer amused, just stunned. Students looked at one another, not with smugness or mockery, but with something far rarer in middle school. Respect. Then came the crescendo. Elijah's hands struck the keys with rising force, building tension and beauty all at once. The chords echoed against the classroom walls, sweeping through every corner like a wave of truth. He pushed through the final run, every note a statement, every chord a release of everything he'd kept bottled up. And then, silence. The last note hung in the air like a secret spoken aloud. It lingered, and then faded into stillness. No one moved. No one spoke. Even Ms. Thornton stood frozen, her face unreadable. Elijah stood up, stepped away from the piano, and didn't say a word. Title, she thought he'd fail. Then this happened. Elijah lowered his hands, resting them on his lap. Silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Then, clap. It came from the back of the room. One student, then another, and another. Within seconds, the classroom was alive with applause. Tyler let out a low whistle. Dang! Brandon, still seated with his arms crossed, shook his head slowly. I didn't know he could do that. Elijah exhaled. His heart pounded, not from nerves, but from the force of what had just happened. He hadn't just played a song. He had shifted the room. He had changed something. The applause grew louder, students exchanging glances like they had just witnessed something they weren't supposed to see, something they wouldn't forget. But the loudest silence came from one place, Ms. Thornton. She stood still at her desk, arms crossed, lips tight, face unreadable. The room cheered around her, but she didn't clap. She didn't move. Elijah sat quietly, breathing deep, not smiling, not looking for approval, just letting the moment stretch, letting them all sit with it. And finally, Ms. Thornton spoke. Well, she said, her voice sharp, that was unexpected. The clapping began to fade, trailing off into whispers and sideways glances. The energy in the room had changed. This wasn't about showing off anymore. This was something deeper. Where did you learn to play like that? She asked, tilting her head. Elijah met her gaze without flinching. My grandfather. Something flickered across her face, something Elijah couldn't name, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. She straightened. I see. There was a pause, then the only sound was her fingers tapping rhythmically on the edge of her desk. And just like that, she pivoted. All right, she said, brushing it off. Let's get back to the lesson. But nobody moved. Elijah looked around. Tyler was still staring at him, eyebrows raised like he couldn't believe what he'd just seen. Madison Green from the back row looked annoyed, like the moment had been stolen too soon. Even Brandon sat there blinking, arms no longer so tightly crossed. That's it? He muttered. Miss Thornton's eyes snapped toward him. Excuse me? Brandon shrugged. I mean, that's all you're gonna say? He just played like... He waved his hand vaguely. Like something you'd hear on TV. And you're just gonna move on? A few students nodded quietly in agreement. Miss Thornton's jaw clenched. This is a classroom, not a talent show. Elijah inhaled slowly, steadying himself. You didn't think I could play, did you? Her eyes locked onto his, sharp, defensive. You thought I'd mess up, he continued, voice calm but unwavering. That's why you called me up there. The room tensed again. More whispers, more watching. Miss Thornton's lips parted, then closed. Her fingers curled against the desk. I gave you an opportunity, she said, her tone tight, to share your talent with the class. Elijah shook his head. No, you didn't. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. You thought I'd fail. You expected me to fall on my face, and you wanted everyone to see it. He turned slightly, gesturing around the room. You wouldn't have asked Tyler, he said, nodding toward his friend, or Madison, or Brandon. But you asked me. A beat of silence fell over the room. Miss Thornton's voice dropped an octave. That's enough, Elijah. But he wasn't finished. Number, I don't think it is. Now she looked at him. Not just a student, but something more. Something that didn't fit the box she had quietly placed him in. The box he had just broken wide open. And the class? They were watching it unfold like a movie they hadn't seen before, but suddenly couldn't look away. Title, he played one song. Now she'll never see him the same again. Miss Thornton's posture stiffened. Sit down, she said flatly. But for the first time all year, Elijah didn't move. He stood there, eyes scanning the room, at the classmates who used to ignore him, at the ones who had written him off the second his name was called, at the ones who had smirked, waiting for him to fail. Then slowly, deliberately, he walked back to his seat. The silence felt heavier now, charged. And for all of Ms. Thornton's usual control, there was something off about her, a faint crack in her composure. Because this time, she wasn't the one commanding the room. Elijah sat down, calm and composed. The stares didn't faze him. The tension didn't shake him. Tyler gave him a small nod. No words needed. Madison sat with her arms folded, still watching Miss Thornton like she was waiting for something more. An acknowledgement, an apology, anything. But Miss Thornton turned away, flipping open her lesson plan like nothing had happened. "Let's move on," she said sharply. But the room didn't just move on. The atmosphere didn't reset the way she wanted. The air still buzzed. Whispers lingered. It wasn't just about music anymore. Brandon leaned back in his chair. "Kinda weird how you don't want to talk about it." Ms. Thornton's eyes snapped up. "Excuse me?" Brandon shrugged. "You made a big deal out of him playing, and now you're pretending it didn't happen?" A few murmurs of agreement rose from the class. Her grip on the lesson book tightened. "That's enough." But it was already too late. Elijah had seen it. So had everyone else. The hesitation, the discomfort, the loss of control. For the rest of the class, Ms. Thornton still taught, but something was different. Her authority, once solid, now felt brittle, like a glass window that had just been cracked. When the bell finally rang, chairs scraped back and students packed up their bags with a new kind of energy. The whispers hadn't stopped. Elijah slung his bag over his shoulder and walked toward the door. "Elijah!" Miss Thornton called out just as he reached it. He turned. For a moment it looked like she might say something real, something honest. But then her expression hardened again. "I hope you understand," she said. "This is still my classroom." Elijah studied her for a beat. Calm, steady. "I know." And with that, he walked out. Tyler caught up to him in the hallway. "Bro," he said, grinning. "What was that? You just flipped the whole script." Elijah exhaled, a soft smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah." Tyler nudged him. "You gonna play again?" Elijah thought of the keys beneath his hands, of the silence that had filled with music, of the feeling when the room finally saw him. "Yeah," he said. "I think I will." Because today he hadn't just played a song, he had been heard. Elijah walked home that afternoon with a lightness in his step. The sun hung low over West Markham Street, casting long shadows across the pavement. The tension from the day before, the weight of doubt, was gone. At the corner store, he stopped for a bottle of water. Mr. Henson, the old man who ran the place, gave him a knowing smile. "You look like a kid who just did something important." Elijah hesitated, then smiled. "Maybe I did." By the time he got home, the smell of fried catfish and cornbread filled the air. His mother was at the stove, humming softly as she flipped a fillet. "You're home late." Elijah dropped his bag by the door and sat at the kitchen table. "Had a long day." She glanced over her shoulder. "Good long or bad long?" He thought about the silence, the stunned faces, the moment he stopped being invisible. "Good," he said. "Really good." She turned off the burner and wiped her hands on a dish towel before sitting across from him. "You want to talk about it?" He nodded, and for the next 15 minutes, Elijah told her everything. She didn't interrupt, didn't judge. She just listened, her expression shifting between concern, pride, and something else, something softer, maybe even sadness. When he finished, she exhaled. "Sounds like you made her uncomfortable." "I think I did." She studied him for a moment. "And how do you feel about that?" Elijah didn't need time to answer. "Like it was supposed to happen." She reached across the table, squeezed his hand, and smiled. "Good." The next day at school, things weren't drastically different, but the air had changed. Ms. Thornton still ran her class like always, still followed her lesson plan, still acted like nothing had happened. But everyone knew her voice didn't carry the same weight. And Elijah? People looked at him differently now. During lunch, a few students who had never said more than 2 words to him walked over to his table. "Dude, you were insane on that piano," Madison said, sliding into the seat across from him. "How long you been playing?" another asked. "Since I was 5, Elijah replied casually. Tyler laughed. "Man, you've been holding out on us." Elijah smirked. "Guess so." Across the cafeteria, Miss Thornton walked by, lunch tray in hand. Their eyes met. This time she looked away first. And Elijah, he just kept eating, because he'd already said everything he needed to say. Some lessons don't come from books. Some moments crack the surface wide open. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to stay silent. Miss Thornton had spent the year looking past Elijah. But in just a few minutes, he made sure she'd never do that again. She might never say it, might never admit the way she judged him. But it didn't matter, because Elijah had learned something she hadn't. When people doubt you, when they try to silence you, the best response isn't anger, it's excellence. Let your talent speak louder than their expectations. And when you do, they'll have no choice but to listen.